In this lecture, I'm just going to finish up a little bit of the terminology from the last lecture, and then we're going to dive into the differences between the types of muscle. Up to this point, I've really just been talking about skeletal muscle. But if you remember from the tissue unit, there are actually three types of muscle: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. So today I'm going to cover the differences between those as well. But let's get started. So one of the things that you have to remember about muscles is the whole point of a muscle is for movement, right? The whole point is to, for skeletal muscles is to move the body, right? So every muscle is attaching to at least two bones. Some have multiple bones they attach to, but every muscle attaches to at least two bones. And there's going to be one end that attaches to a bone that moves, and there's going to be one end that attaches to a bone that's stationary. And there's some terminology for that. They're called origin and insertion. The origin is the part of the muscle that attaches to the non-moving bone, so the stationary bone. And the insertion is the part of the muscle that attaches to the moving bone. Let's think about that for a second. Imagine tug of war. If you were playing tug of war with somebody and both people were wearing roller skates, it wouldn't work very well, right? If both people can move around, you would not have any force to pull on. You would both fall down. It wouldn't work, right? So if muscles attached to two bones that moved, there'd be no actual tension there, and it would not have movement. So if you look at this diagram here, you can see this is the bicep muscle. So the bicep muscle attaches it actually attaches in three places because there's two heads to the bicep. But the origin is the part that is not moving. So the origin is going to be this coracoid process, which is right here, right in the middle, kind of below your clavicle. And then the insertion is going to be on your actual radius bone down here. So when that muscle contracts, the radius moves towards the shoulder. The origin stays in place and the insertion moves. So the insertion is always going to be the bone that moves. So during a contraction, the insertion is always pulled towards the origin. So the origin is going to be what doesn't move and the insertion is going to be what does move. So the insertion anchors itself and then it pulls on the origin anchors itself and it pulls on the bone that is attached to the insertion. So just make sure you're able to distinguish between origin and insertion. The origin doesn't move, the insertion does, and then that causes movement. Couple more terms you need to be familiar with. Well, when you're talking about movement, there's muscles involved. There are 600 something muscles in the human body. But there are some large muscles that are really what we consider to be the prime movers. So these are muscles that are responsible for most of the movement. So if you look here, again, we're using the biceps as an example. The bicep would be the prime mover for flexion at the arm. So if you take your arm and move it to your forehead here, if you do this motion, it's your bicep that pulls it forward. That is called the prime mover because it's making the movement happen. Now this is something you may not have been aware of. There's a small muscle just underneath the bicep called the brachialis, right? So if you can feel it. Let's go for that. Let's try it real quick. So put your arm out straight and now flex your bicep, okay? Now go down to where your bicep is just hitting the middle of your elbow, right? To this area right here. And you should feel that you can move the bicep muscle back and forth. Now, if you go just deep to that, just right here, there's another muscle underneath the bicep. That is called the brachialis. It is a small muscle. It is not strong enough to do it on its own, but it helps the prime mover. These are called synergists. So our muscle groups actually, if you've ever gone to the gym before and you've done a workout, you'll notice on the machine, it usually gives you a breakdown of what muscles are being affected. So for example, a pull-up is mostly your back muscle, right? That would be the prime mover. But it also works out your biceps and your shoulders. Those would be the synergists because they're helping the movement out. They're not the main muscle, but they're synergists. And then if there's a prime mover, there's always going to be an antagonist. And the antagonist is the muscle that resists that motion. And it causes a movement in the opposite direction. So let's talk about your biceps again. If you move your bicep forward, that contracts the bicep. On the back of your arm are the triceps. So let's just do this real quick. If everybody can just try this real fast, you're going to take your hand and put it around your arm like this. Now, what you should feel is if you move your arm back and forth, you should feel two muscles moving. When you go this way, you should feel your bicep move. And then when you go out that way, you should feel your tricep move. And they are opposites of each other. If you flex both at the same time, what happens? while your arm shoots out straight. You can't move if the prime mover and the antagonist are both flexing at the same time. It resists movement. So the prime mover is the main muscle involved in the motion. The synergist is there to help and support the main muscle. And then the antagonist is the opposite muscle that resists that motion. So if I go to my leg, your quadriceps, so kick your leg out real quick. Your quadricep is what causes that to happen. And on the back of your leg are the hamstrings, and that is the antagonist to that motion. Okay, we're going to finish up here now by looking at the differences between the three types of muscles. So I'm going to run through this chart. You have a chart that I gave you that you can use to fill in if you want. That might make it easier. And then, so this is going to be a little bit of a longer lecture, but I'm going to get through all this. So let's roll through it, okay? So we have three types of muscles: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. And again, just a reminder, skeletal muscle is for movement. That's attached to the skeleton. Smooth muscle is going to be found throughout the body in the organs and in vessels, and that is for usually moving things. So not moving the body, but moving things through it, pushing food through your intestines, causing your stomach to contract, opening and closing your blood vessels. And then finally, our cardiac muscle has one job. It's your heart muscle, and it pushes blood through your system. So let's take a look here at some of the characteristics. As I'm saying this, I'm realizing I'm probably going to split this into two lectures. So we're just going to do the first chunk of this, and then we'll do another lecture for the second chunk. So let's get rolling here. So this is just structurally. What are the differences? Well, skeletal muscle we talked about. They're long, thin cells with multiple nuclei, and that's because they were originally several cells that fuse together into one cell during development. Smooth muscle, on the other hand, are smaller. They are spindle-shaped, so these are small cells, each one with a single nucleus. And then cardiac muscle is going to look like skeletal muscle, but it's going to be branched, and they're also going to have one nucleus per cell. So I'm just going to flip to this next slide where I have a picture of those. So for example, this would be your skeletal muscle, long, thin muscle cells, multiple nuclei. These would be the smooth muscle here, individual cells with one single nuclei. And then this would be your cardiac muscle here. You can see it branching off, and you have one single nuclei. Okay, next thing. And I'm moving rather quickly through this, so feel free to pause it at any point if you need to catch up. T-tubules. T-tubules are important because muscle cells are round and they have a diameter. And in order to make that entire muscle contract, you need a T-tubule to go deep into the muscle fiber. That is only for skeletal muscle. So T-tubules are in skeletal muscle because T-tubules are cylindrical and thick. You don't need T-tubules in smooth cells because they're small. The impulse just makes the muscle contract. And then finally, cardiac muscle is specialized because cardiac muscle, your heart has to beat 60 to 80 times a minute every minute of your life. That is a really tall order for a muscle. So in order to do that, we have very large T-tubules in our cardiac muscle. That allows the impulse to quickly move into the muscle so the heart can react quickly. Also, there's a lot more calcium in your cardiac muscle. There's more calcium that gets released during a contraction. That way it can stay contracted longer. More calcium means that muscle can continue to contract without a problem. You may have heard of calcium channel blockers before. That's why it says that here. If people have issues with their heart, where their heart is overactive, right? Their heart beats too much and they could lead to a heart attack. Sometimes you could take something called a calcium channel blocker and it actually slows your heart down. So it's like it kind of puts the brakes on your heart. But that's just something for you to know. You're not responsible for that. So again, T-tubules are going to be in skeletal muscle, no T-tubules in smooth muscle, and then large T-tubules in cardiac muscle with an excess amount of calcium because that muscle needs a lot of calcium to function. And then lastly on this slide, we have just this terminology here we talked about before of striated versus non-striated and voluntary versus involuntary. Remember, striations come from sarcomeres. It's that A band and the I band that make a muscle striated. So skeletal muscle has very organized actin and myosin fibers. There are sarcomeres, so that is going to be an organized muscle fiber where you're going to see like dart, like dart. So that's striated and voluntary because we can control our skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle, on the other hand, is not striated. They do not have an organized sarcomere. They have actin and myosin. So imagine a skeletal muscle where actin and myosin is set up like this, so this muscle can contract and relax. If I were to do the same exact hand model here for your smooth muscle, it would look like this. It's a tangled up mess. There's no organization to your smooth muscle. Actin and myosin are just a big tangled up mess. And when it contracts, you get a very messy contraction. It kind of just, imagine squeezing a sponge, right? That's not going to give you any direct movement. But the whole point of smooth muscle is it's a weak contraction and it kind of pushes. So that's going to not have striations, and it is involuntary. We cannot control our smooth muscle. That is what's pushing blood through our blood vessels. That is what's pushing food through our intestines. And then finally, our cardiac muscle is striated. It has actin and myosin, just like our skeletal muscle does, but it is involuntary. You cannot control your heart, and that is a good thing. You don't want to have to think about that. Your heart is working off of a rhythm, which is kind of awesome. I love that about the heart. Everybody has their own rhythm. We'll talk about that when we get to the heart unit. But you have a pacemaker, which is controlling your heart rate, and you do not control that on your own. Let's do a couple more, and then we'll end this lecture. Couple more things about the different types of muscle. Let's talk about stimulation, okay? So in order for a skeletal muscle to contract, you need a nerve. It's as simple as that. The nerve impulse causes a contraction. That's how that muscle contracts. Smooth muscle, on the other hand, it also uses a nervous impulse, but it can also stimulate itself. It displays rhythmicity. What that means is there's a rhythm to it. So one cell stimulates the next cell, and that is called peristalsis. So I'm just going to explain peristalsis here, and we're going to finish up the lecture with that. So rhythmicity, and each cell can stimulate the next. So let me explain what that means. So you've all heard the game Whisper Down the Lane, right? So if you're standing in a line and we want to play Whisper Down the Lane, I'm going to whisper to the first person in line, and they're going to whisper to the next person, and then each person says the message all the way down the line until it gets to the last person. Well, that is essentially how your intestines work. Intestines are an extremely long organ. If you were to stretch out your intestines, it stretches out for hundreds of yards. I mean, it's ridiculously long. And your food moves through it very slowly so you can absorb those nutrients. Well, how does the food move through it? Well, these little muscle cells so let's say this is smooth muscle in your intestines. What happens is this first muscle here is going to contract. And that is going to stimulate the next muscle to contract. And what ends up happening is this little, let's say this is the food piece here, it's going to be right like that. So when this muscle contracts, it pushes that forward. When that muscle contracts, it pushes it forward a little more. That would trigger this muscle to contract. So imagine I had a tube with a ball in it. If I just keep squeezing behind the ball all the way down the line, that ball is going to move down the tube. And that is how food moves through your digestive tract. Each smooth muscle cell stimulates the next smooth muscle cell. That is called peristalsis, and that's how food moves to the intestines. Sometimes people have problems with that, and if your muscles are not functioning right, you can have food stuck there if it's not able to be pushed through. And then finally, the cardiac muscle is amazing. The cardiac muscle can stimulate itself, and it's pretty awesome. There's a little essay note in there. It's the heart's pacemaker, and it has a set rhythm. And your heart beats at that rhythm every day of your life. So if you were to sit there and take your pulse right now, you probably find that your heart beats between 60 and 80 beats per minute. And if you were to take it again tomorrow, it should be about the same. Everybody has their own rhythm. We're not all the same. My heart beats a little, as you could probably imagine, based on my personality, my heart rate's a little high. I'm a little high strung. And that is something that's just part of my rhythm, right? So your cardiac muscle stimulates itself. Similar to peristalsis, but it's not the same thing. I'm going to finish up the rest of this in another lecture. Thank you very much.